Water is the key to life. It has very unique properties, like being an amazing solvent, which means that it's easy for solutes to dissolve into. As a result, water can carry essential nutrients to our cells, as well as toxins or waste products away from our cells to be excreted out of our system. Total body water can be subdivided into two major compartments: intracellular fluid and extracellular fluid. On average, total body water in a person is about 60% of their body weight. From the total body water, 2/3 of that, or 40% of body weight, is intracellular fluid. The other 1/3, or 20% of the body weight, is extracellular fluid. And this is also known as the 60-40-20 rule. Intracellular fluid is the fluid which is inside the cell, and extracellular fluid is the fluid that's outside the cell. Extracellular fluid can be further subdivided into interstitial fluid, which is the fluid surrounding the cell, and plasma, which is the fluid that circulates within the blood vessels. Extracellular fluid is the first to be lost, and makes up fluids like gut fluids, sweat, and other secretions. The extracellular fluid is made up of different solutes, the major cation being sodium, and the major anions being chloride and bicarbonate. Each compartment has a specific solute concentration, measured in milliosmoles per liter, or osmolarity, which is the number of osmoles within a liter of solution. Now remember that an osmole refers to the individual ions within a solution. So, for example, sodium chloride splits apart in water to become sodium and chloride. So a solution of 1 millimole per liter of sodium chloride is actually 2 milliosmoles per liter. Normally, osmolarity in the intracellular fluid and extracellular fluid is equal. If either side ever has a few more solutes, then water will flow in that direction to lower the concentration slightly and maintain the balance. This process is called osmosis. Now, some solutes like sodium bicarbonate, as well as large sugars like mannitol, are too large to cross cellular membranes, and they're basically trapped in the extracellular fluid. Usually, the extracellular fluid is more easily affected by physiologic processes. So we'll look at the volume and concentration of the extracellular fluid. In terms of volume, contraction means a decrease in extracellular fluid volume, and expansion means an increase in extracellular fluid volume. In terms of concentration, an isosmotic disturbance means that there's no change in extracellular fluid osmolarity. A hyperosmotic disturbance means that there's an increase in extracellular fluid osmolarity, and a hyposmotic disturbance means that there's a decrease in extracellular fluid osmolarity. We'll go through 6 common scenarios to see how they affect the body's fluid compartments, and we'll use a 2-step approach for each scenario. First, we'll identify any changes in the extracellular fluid osmolarity, like adding or removing solutes, or gaining or losing water. Second, if there's a change in extracellular fluid osmolarity, we'll figure out how the water must shift to reestablish balance between extracellular fluid and intracellular fluid osmolarity. Someone with diarrhea will lose a lot of fluid and solutes from the gastrointestinal tract, which ultimately comes from the extracellular fluid. And the osmolarity of diarrhea is similar to that of the extracellular fluid. In other words, losing fluid in the form of diarrhea means that there's less extracellular fluid, but its osmolarity is unchanged. With no change in osmolarity, there'll be no water shift, and intracellular fluid volume actually stays the same. This means that there's an isosmotic volume contraction. Consequences include a decrease in plasma volume leading to a decrease in arterial pressure, as well as an increased plasma protein concentration and an increased hematocrit, which is the portion of blood that's occupied by red blood cells. The second situation is a person running a marathon and losing a ton of sweat, which contains both sodium and chloride ions as well as water. Interestingly, sweat is actually hyposmotic relative to extracellular fluid, so it has relatively more water than solute. When a hyposmotic fluid is lost from the extracellular fluid, the volume of the extracellular fluid decreases, and the osmolarity increases. When the osmolarity in the extracellular fluid rises compared to the intracellular fluid, Water moves by osmosis from the intracellular fluid into the extracellular fluid. Once steady state is established, volume decreases and osmolarity increases in both compartments. This means that there's a hyperosmotic volume contraction. Consequences include an increased plasma protein concentration due to a loss of volume but an unchanged hematocrit, since the red blood cells lose volume as well. The third situation is someone with adrenal insufficiency, where there's a deficiency in several hormones including aldosterone. Aldosterone plays a huge role in sodium reabsorption in the kidneys. So in adrenal insufficiency, excess sodium is lost in the urine. Since sodium, a major component of extracellular fluid, is lost, the extracellular fluid osmolarity decreases. This causes water to shift from the extracellular fluid to the intracellular fluid by osmosis, until both compartments have the same osmolarity. Once steady state is established, both extracellular fluid and intracellular fluid osmolarities will be lower, and the extracellular fluid volume decreases and the intracellular fluid volume increases. This means that there's a hyposmotic volume contraction. Consequences include an increase in both plasma protein concentration and hematocrit, due to a loss of volume, but also because the water will shift into the red blood cells. The fourth situation is a person in the hospital getting an infusion of isotonic sodium chloride, perhaps after a bout of intense diarrhea. Now, sodium ions might leak across the cell membrane and pass from the extracellular fluid into the intracellular fluid. But the sodium-potassium ATPase pump actively pushes sodium ions into the extracellular fluid, and potassium ions into the intracellular fluid. Chloride, on the other hand, stays around sodium so that the charges are balanced. So ultimately, all of the isotonic sodium chloride solution gets added only to the extracellular fluid. This causes an increase in volume of the extracellular fluid, but doesn't change the osmolarity. Since the solution added is isotonic, it doesn't change the osmolarity, so there'll be no water shift. This means that there's an isosmotic volume expansion. Consequences include a decrease in both plasma protein concentration and hematocrit because of dilution. The fifth situation is someone who eats a bag full of salty chips. The extra sodium and chloride ions in the body increases osmolarity of the extracellular fluid. This causes water to move from the intracellular fluid to the extracellular fluid in order to raise osmolarity of the intracellular fluid. Once steady state is reached, both extracellular fluid and intracellular fluid osmolarities will be higher, but the extracellular fluid volume will have increased, and the intracellular fluid volume will have decreased. This means that there's a hyperosmotic volume expansion. Consequences include a decrease in both plasma protein concentration and hematocrit, due to the increase in extracellular fluid volume. Additionally, hematocrit will be further decreased from the water shift out of red blood cells. The sixth situation is someone with syndrome of inappropriate antidiuretic hormone, or SIADH. In this condition, inappropriately high levels of antidiuretic hormone are released, causing the kidneys to increase water reabsorption. When there are abnormally high levels of ADH, too much water is reabsorbed, and the excess water is distributed throughout the total body water, in a 1/3 extracellular fluid to 2/3 intracellular fluid ratio. As a result, both extracellular and intracellular fluid volume increase, and that causes the osmolarities to decrease. This means that there's a hyposmotic volume expansion. Consequences include a decrease of the plasma protein concentration due to dilution, and no change in hematocrit due to the concentration of the red blood cells decreasing from dilution, but red blood cell volume increasing because water has moved into them. Alright, as a quick recap. Total body water can be broken down into 1/3 extracellular fluid and 2/3 intracellular fluid. Changes in solutes or water volume in these compartments causes a compensatory reaction where water flows in order to balance out both compartments until they have the same osmolarity and reach a new steady state. As a consequence of water shifts, both plasma protein concentration and hematocrit will be affected.